That night, the hospital felt like it had sunk into another world, eerily quiet. The dim light from the emergency lamps cast pale reflections on the emotionless white walls, making the entire space seem as if it were holding its breath. Nurses and night shift doctors continued working in silence, whispering to one another as though any loud sound might awaken something sacred. Then, the automatic front doors gently slid open. No sirens, no stretcher, just a lone figure stepping inside. It was a dog, a German shepherd. Its fur was matted with dust and dirt. Its steps slow but filled with determination. In its mouth, it carried an object hastily wrapped in an old cloth. Its eyes held no panic, only weariness and urgency, as if it knew it was carrying something more important than its own life. The first to react was a young nurse. Her eyes widened in shock, but her professional instincts drew her forward. As she knelt down and carefully unwrapped the cloth, all sounds around seemed to vanish. Inside was a child, a tiny baby boy, fragile, his pale body barely there, as though he might disappear into thin air. He was gasping for breath, each inhale short and shallow, his little chest rising and falling so faintly it looked like it might stop at any moment. "Oh my God, it's a baby," the nurse choked out, her hands trembling. Immediately, the emergency room erupted into motion. Footsteps echoed through the halls. Doctors rushed in, ventilators, oxygen tanks, medical tools were pulled out as though preparing for a battle to reclaim life. In the midst of the chaos, the dog stood still, not barking, not whining, not moving, just silently watching the baby with the eyes of someone who had placed all his last hopes into this one life or death decision. His name was Rex, a dog that once served in the police force, now standing under the cold lights of a hospital, carrying the most fragile life he had ever protected. No one knew how Rex found his way here. No one understood how he managed to navigate the night, the city, and danger just to bring a child to the doorstep of the only place that could save him. But in that moment, no one questioned it, no one doubted. They only knew. They had to fight for the baby's life, the boy named Anthony, before it was too late. And Rex still stood there, eyes unmoving, as if he understood, if the boy didn't survive, then he, a soldier without a partner, would lose his last reason to exist. The sound of the heart monitor echoed steadily but faintly, like a warning that each passing second was one step closer to the edge between life and death. Anthony, the child Rex had brought in, lay surrounded by medical equipment, so tiny that the oxygen mask nearly covered his entire face. His lips were purplish, his skin cold to the touch, and his breath was as fragile as a wisp of smoke on the verge of fading. "Intubate. Prepare the IV," the lead doctor barked, his voice taut like a stretched wire. The entire medical team had no time left for shock or wonder. Now they were all bracing themselves for a race in which death was the opponent. A nurse rushed to take his blood pressure. 60/30. The heartbeat is very weak. He's severely dehydrated. Blood sugar is crashing. Body temperature is dropping. Another doctor reported while attaching a line to Anthony's tiny arm. His hands were trembling with emotion, but his movements remained precise to the millimeter. Meanwhile, Rex still stood motionless at the emergency room door, causing no disruption. He didn't need to bark a single word, yet his eyes followed every move of the doctors with a silent plea, as if begging each person in the room, "Please, save him." An elderly nurse stood quietly next to Rex, her eyes brimming with tears. She had never seen such a look in an animal, a gaze filled with so much hope and pain. "You know," she whispered as if speaking to an old friend, "you've done something many humans wouldn't dare to do, entrust a life to your last shred of hope." No one knew who Anthony was, where he came from, or why he was in such a state. But to those present, that didn't matter anymore. There was a child who needed to live. And there was a dog, a former police K9, who had placed all his trust in them. More than 30 minutes passed, each one tense as a blade carving into everyone's nerves. Beads of sweat formed on the foreheads of doctors and nurses. A moment, long and seemingly endless, dragged on. Then a beep rang out, clearer, stronger. Anthony's tiny heart had begun to beat more steadily. Everyone held their breath, heartbeat stabilizing. Blood pressure is rising. A nurse exhaled, as if releasing a burden. He's responding to oxygen. He might just make it. No one could speak. A quiet wave of relief swept through the room, blending with the rising emotion shining in each eye. Rex had still not left. When he saw Anthony move slightly, as if clinging to the final thread tying him to life, the dog gently lay his body down on the cold tile floor, eyes never leaving the boy, as if he had completed a part of his sacred mission. Someone quietly placed a hand on Rex's head and whispered, "Well done, silent hero." But this was only the beginning. Outside the emergency room, red and blue lights from police cars flickered across the hospital walls in the dead of night. The already still air grew even more suffocating with the presence of those trying to answer one enormous question. How could a dog possibly bring a child here, at the right time? To the right place, and to the right people? Lieutenant Daniels, head of the investigation team, entered the emergency wing with 2 officers trailing behind him. He stopped in front of Rex, the 4-legged companion still lying near the door, eyes never leaving Anthony who lay inside. "This is the dog that brought the child here?" Daniels asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Yes, sir. No one knows where he came from. He didn't bark, didn't cause a disturbance, just came here, placed the child down, and stood guard like a father," the head nurse replied, her eyes filled with admiration. Daniels gave a slight nod, then gestured for his subordinate to bring over the microchip scanner. But the moment they got close, Rex sprang up, no growl, but his gaze turned sharp, ears alert, his body rigid. A silence fell, a silence that needed no words. But everyone understood. "Stop. Be careful. This dog has been trained." The young officer stepped back, exclaiming, "He's reacting like a retired K9. Daniels stepped forward, but his approach was gentler. "It's all right," he said softly, partly to the people, partly to Rex. "We just want to help." Rex watched him for a long moment, long enough to assess something deep within the man standing before him. Then, the dog slowly lowered his body, allowing the officer to clip the leash onto his collar. "All right, buddy," Daniels whispered, crouching beside Rex. "Now, show us where the boy came from." And then, as if he understood every single word, Rex slowly rose. He didn't bark, he didn't hesitate. He turned and began to walk, not stumbling, not confused, but with clear purpose. The entire team followed, their footsteps soft against the tiled corridor. Hospital staff stood silently, watching in awe. No one said a word. They were witnessing something medicine couldn't explain, something that logic failed to grasp. A dog was leading humans toward a secret. The convoy of police vehicles rolled through the night, headlights sweeping over each shadowy corner of the city. No one in the cars spoke. No one needed to ask where Rex was taking them, because the dog moved as if retracing every step he had taken, every turn, every junction, as if his memory was a survival map etched into his mind. Then Rex stopped. In front of them stood a small, rundown house nestled in the middle of an abandoned neighborhood. The roof sagged. The front door stood ajar. Darkness swallowed everything inside. Daniel stepped out of the vehicle, eyes fixed on the house. "Is this where it all began?" No one answered. Only Rex remained, still and silent, eyes locked onto the black void waiting behind the wooden doorframe, where an untold story was hiding, waiting to be revealed. The first step into the house made the wooden floor creak with an eerie groan. The air was thick with mold and the stench of rotting food, engulfing the entire police team. The house resembled a forgotten painting, stained walls, scattered furniture, toppled chairs, and the remnants of a family that once existed, now reduced to ruinous memories. Rex led the way, each step light but sure. He moved through the dust-filled living room, carefully avoiding objects as if he had walked this path many times before. At the end of the hallway, he stopped in front of a small wooden door, slightly ajar. Rex's damp nose nudged the edge of the door. Then he turned to look at Daniels, not with urgency, but with a simple gaze that said, "It's time." Daniels gave his team a signal. "Careful, there may be someone inside." 2 officers raised their flashlights and pushed the door open. Inside was a dimly lit room. A torn curtain hung over a dust-covered window. But what made the entire team freeze was the sight of an old crib in the corner, empty, coated in a fine layer of dust, yet clearly recently used. Beside it was a hardened dog food bowl, a crumpled child's blanket, and scattered baby toys lying on cracked tiles. One officer knelt down, running a finger across the dust on the crib's rail. The child was here. Rex moved closer, gently sniffed the edge of the crib, then lay down on the cold floor beside it, as if to confirm. This is where Antony once slept. And this was where he had silently stood guard. "Dear God," an officer murmured. Daniels turned to his team. His expression sharp. "Search the house thoroughly. Look for any clues about what happened here." Meanwhile, another officer entered the kitchen. The stench from the sink was overwhelming. On the table, amid dirty dishes and scattered papers, lay a crumpled envelope, unsealed. Inside was a hastily scribbled note, the handwriting shaky, as if written by someone trembling in desperation. "Lieutenant," the officer called out, tension in his voice, "I found this." Daniels took the paper and read it aloud to the team. "I can't go on anymore. Everything is falling apart. I have nothing left but Rex. I know he'll do the right thing. Please forgive me if someone finds these words one day." Silence fell over the room. No one spoke. No one needed to. The letter was the final breath of a mother pushed to the edge, entrusting the life of her son to the one creature who remained loyal, a dog. Rex still lay beside the crib, but his ears stayed alert, eyes open, never leaving the door, as if he knew the mission wasn't over. "We have to find the mother," Daniels said, his gaze sharpening. "She needs help, and clearly, she's running out of time." The patrol cars rolled silently away from the crumbling house. Red and blue lights flickered against the peeling walls, casting a somber reminder of the despair that had just been uncovered. In the backseat, Rex sat quietly, his eyes gazing through the fogged-up window, watching the city fade into the night. Daniels held the handwritten letter tightly, now pressed into an evidence folder. He knew this wasn't just a case of child abandonment. This was a wordless cry for help, from a mother who had poured her last drop of faith into the most loyal creature of her life. And Rex had not let her down. "We need to find her," Daniels repeated firmly. "If she's still alive, she's dying inside, buried under guilt." The police fanned out, sweeping through the surrounding areas. They knocked on every door still lit in the decaying alley, questioning the remaining residents in this forgotten corner of suburbia. Most shook their heads. They hadn't seen anyone, hadn't heard anything, until an old man with a crown of white hair opened a creaking wooden gate. "I remember the girl," he said, voice trembling but clear. "There was always a big dog with her. That one, right?" He pointed at Rex, who now stood beside Daniels. His eyes locked onto the storyteller's face. "I saw her carrying a baby, a few months ago. Then, nothing, like she just vanished." That answer was enough to expand the search. Police began combing through parks, bus stops, even the shelters where the homeless sought warmth. By dawn, a call came in from the Riverside Park Patrol Unit. A young woman had been found, sitting motionless on a bench, arms wrapped around herself against the biting cold. Daniels arrived just minutes later. She sat curled up, tangled hair veiling half her face, clothes crumpled, eyes hollow. The cold wind hissed through leafless trees, cutting into her skin without mercy. Rex walked up slowly, no barking, no whining. He simply sat in front of her. The woman lifted her head. Her sleep-deprived, clouded eyes widened. "Rex," her voice trembled like a fragile thread. Daniels stepped forward, kneeling to meet her eye level. "Are you the boy's mother?" The child was brought to the hospital by this dog. Her lips quivered. "Antony, it's Antony, isn't it?" A single tear slipped down, carrying with it all the fear, hope, and regret bottled up for far too long. Is he alive?" "He is, and he's recovering," Daniels said gently. "He's being well cared for." She broke down. The sobs came in waves, raw, uncontrollable, like a door that had long been bolted shut had finally burst open. "His father left, without a word. I tried, but we ran out of food, money, even hope." She choked on her words. "I was too weak to take Antony to the hospital. But I trusted. I knew Rex would do the right thing." Daniels nodded, his eyes fixed on the woman, Rachel, not as someone who had abandoned her child, but as a mother who had made the hardest, most painful choice out of love. An ambulance arrived. Rachel was lifted onto a stretcher, wrapped in blankets and hooked to IV fluids. In that fleeting moment, before the doors closed, Rex leapt up gently, lying beside her feet. She reached out and stroked his head, as if to whisper a silent thank you. Rex remained silent, loyal, calm, and unwavering. He never left. The ambulance came to a quiet stop in front of the pediatrics wing under the soft morning light. The first rays of the day filtered through the hospital's glass doors, illuminating Rachel's pale but hopeful face. Lying on the stretcher slowly pushed down the sterile white corridor. She looked around, ceiling panels, fleeting silhouettes, but nothing made her heart race like the final door at the end of the hallway. The one behind which her son, Anthony, was fighting for his life on the thin line between survival and loss. Rex walked beside her, his steps steady, his gaze locked forward. He didn't lick Rachel's hand, didn't bark, as if he understood this moment wasn't meant for sound, but for sacred silence. A young nurse pushed open the door. Inside the room, little Anthony lay in a small hospital bed, surrounded by a respirator, IV lines, and a warm golden light. His skin was no longer ghostly pale as when he was found. His breathing, though still weak, had become more stable. On the bedside table, a stuffed animal had been carefully placed, as if someone was trying to offer peace to a fragile soul wrestling with fate. Rachel stepped forward. Each movement dragged her soul closer to the surface, where it threatened to shatter in her chest. Her trembling hand reached for her son, a small gesture holding the weight of years of pain and regret. Her fingers gently touched Anthony's cheek. "Anthony," her voice cracked, hoarse and broken. "Mommy's here now. Mommy's here, baby." Suddenly, Anthony's eyelids twitched. Then, a faint motion, barely a shift, at the corner of his lips. A sound escaped his throat. Unclear whether it was breath or a subconscious call. But to Rachel, it was the most miraculous symphony of her life. Rex stood by the doorway, quietly watching. He tilted his head slightly, ears perked, tail brushing the floor. Everyone in the room, doctors, nurses, froze, breath held tight. No one spoke. No one needed to. A doctor approached Rachel and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "He's out of critical condition. We'll keep monitoring him closely. But, it's thanks to you. And to Rex." Rachel nodded, tears falling onto the back of her hand still clutching her son's. She turned to look at Rex, her gaze not just that of a mother, but of someone staring at the hero who brought her child back from the edge. "You saved both of us," she whispered. "You didn't just bring Anthony to the hospital. You brought me back, from the dark." Rex didn't move, still as a silent guardian. But his eyes, those eyes shimmered with warmth, as if he understood every unspoken word. A nurse knelt down and stroked his head, smiling softly. "You're an angel in a four-legged disguise." From the hallway outside, others watched on, doctors, nurses, Officer Daniels, all those who had witnessed this miraculous journey from the beginning. They said nothing, just stood there in silence. But within every heart, one truth rang clear. Not all heroes wear capes. Some only need a loyal heart, and four legs that know the way back to the light. In the days that followed, no one at the hospital referred to Rex as just a dog anymore. The nurses began calling him the guardian. The doctors called him an honorary member of the pediatrics department. But what Rex embodied wasn't just trained instinct, it was something deeper, more sacred, as if he carried within him a sense beyond the limits of species. Rex never left Anthony's room. Day and night, he lay near the entrance, ears always attentive, eyes never straying from the small hospital bed. Anyone who entered, whether a familiar doctor or nurse, was met with Rex's fixed gaze for a few seconds before being allowed near. Not out of suspicion, but because Rex understood. Anthony was the one life entrusted to him, and he would never falter in that duty. One late afternoon, as the sun quietly slipped past the hospital windows, something strange happened. Anthony's heart monitor showed a slight fluctuation. Nothing dangerous, but enough to bring a nurse in to check. And the moment she stepped through the door, Rex sprang up. He didn't growl or bark, just moved forward one step. Standing between the nurse and Anthony's bed, the nurse froze. She hadn't done anything wrong. But Rex stood his ground, eyes locked on hers, as if waiting for her to retreat. The lead physician on duty entered, witnessing the entire situation. After a few seconds, he calmly placed a hand on the nurse's shoulder. "Step back a bit," he said. No explanation needed. She complied. Rex followed her every move. Only when she had exited the room did Rex return to his spot by the door. "He knows," the doctor murmured. "Not everyone who walks in here carries positive energy. Maybe Rex senses something we can't. From that moment on, the hospital became more mindful. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Respect for a creature that couldn't speak, but could feel. It was during those days that a staff member from the hospital's internal media team, a former war photojournalist, captured a moment that seemed almost unreal. Rex lying beside Antony. One paw resting gently on the bed rail. His head tilted slightly toward the boy, as if listening to each fragile breath. In the photograph, sunlight streamed through the window, casting a golden beam over them both, as though time itself had paused. Condensed into a single moment of love and pure instinct. The photo spread quickly. Within 24 hours, thousands of shares, tens of thousands of messages filled with prayers and gratitude poured in from strangers around the world. But perhaps the only one unaware of his fame was Rex. To him, no camera mattered, no flashbulb meant anything. There was only Antony, the frail little boy who had become Rex's entire world. Rachel understood that better than anyone. Each time she gently stroked Rex's head, she didn't need to say a word, and Rex didn't need to nod, or lick her hand like other dogs might. Between them was a promise etched deep, through a journey, through trials, and through tears they could never put into words. And that very night, for the first time since he had been admitted, Antony opened his eyes and smiled at his mother. A fragile, fleeting smile, but enough to make Rachel's heart overflow. And as if on instinct, Rex wagged his tail. No one told him to do it. No one taught him to be moved. But that was Rex, the one who kept the light burning for a family lost in the dark. That morning, before the sun had fully lit the corridors of the hospital, a parallel investigation was launched by the city police. They didn't just want to know why a dog had carried a child to the hospital in the middle of the night. They needed to know who the mother was, and what had driven her to entrust her child's life to a dog. The search began at the place Rex had led them to before, a small, dilapidated wooden house on the southern outskirts. The house had been abandoned, but still bore clear traces of life once lived, tiny footprints. A bowl for dog food, used diapers, and a tilted cradle leaning against the wall. In the living room, on a dust-covered table, lay a yellowed envelope, tucked loosely between the pages of a decaying notebook. A young officer found it, opened it, and could only make out 4 short lines, written in shaky handwriting as if they had been penned through tears. I have no strength left. I have nothing left to give him. Rex is all I have. If someone finds him, please know, I tried. There was no name, no date, no identifying detail about the writer. But for the police, the letter said more than enough. They called it, the letter of absolute trust, because that mother had placed all of her final hope in a creature that many would consider just an animal. But to her, Rex was family, the only one left she could trust to protect her son. As investigators followed the trail, neighbors around the area began to recall the young woman who had lived there. An elderly man who lived nearby recounted that she often walked with a large black and brown dog, and sometimes pushed a baby stroller with a broken wheel. She never asked anyone for help, the old man said, but in her eyes, there was always a sorrow no one could quite reach. That very day, the police received a call from a park a few blocks from the house. A young woman was sitting silently on a bench, wearing a thin coat, hands trembling, eyes vacant. When Officer Daniels approached, he didn't speak of guilt or investigation. He only asked one simple question. Are you Antony's mother? Those empty eyes instantly welled with tears. She began trembling, as if trying to hold back something that had shattered long ago. My son, is he alive? Her voice was hoarse, almost inaudible. Daniels nodded. The boy is recovering. It was the dog, Rex, who brought him to the hospital. Would you like to see your son again? No words came, only 2 small hands covering her face, and sobs that burst out like a dam breaking from the deepest part of her soul. They brought Rachel, the young woman's name, back to the hospital. She was frail, exhausted, but when she heard the name, Antony, a faint light flickered in her eyes. The moment she stepped into the intensive care room, Rex looked up. He didn't leap in excitement, didn't bark like other dogs might. He simply walked slowly toward Rachel, then sat beside her, as if to say, the boy is still here. I kept my promise. Rachel knelt down, gently running her hand along Rex's back, tears dripping onto his fur. She didn't need anyone to forgive her. She only needed to know. Antony was alive. In that moment, doctors, nurses, police officers, all stood in silence. Because they understood. There is nothing more profound than a love strong enough to place your child's life into the care of a being that cannot speak, only love. The intensive care unit was wrapped in a solemn stillness. The white curtain swayed gently in the breeze from the air conditioning system, while the lights of the vital signs monitor blinked rhythmically like whispers of time. By the bedside, Antony lay still. IV tubes were connected to his tiny arm. On that pale little face, his breathing was steady, his chest rising and falling as if battling, little by little, to hold on to life. Rachel sat beside him, clutching her son's hand. For the first time in many days, she felt warmth from that hand, faint, fragile, but real. "Antony, Mommy's here," she whispered, her lips trembling with emotion. That voice, a mother's voice, was like a gentle stream, flowing into every corner of the child's subconscious. Antony stirred slightly, his brows furrowed, then relaxed. A slow blink, a soft whimper, and then, his lips curved ever so slightly into a faint smile, like a sunbeam piercing through a fog. Rachel choked back tears. "You missed Mommy, didn't you? You can hear me now, can't you?" The doctor stepped in at that moment, quietly observing. He didn't need to say a word. The numbers on the monitor spoke for themselves. Antony was recovering. Slowly, but surely. At the door, Rex remained on guard, his ears slightly drooped, his steadfast eyes fixed on the mother and child. A nurse brought Rex a soft towel and a bowl of water. He glanced at them but returned immediately to his post, as if fearing that even one moment of distraction might cause Antony to slip away from this world again. That scene quickly spread throughout the hospital. No one hadn't heard about the dog who brought a baby into the emergency room. An elderly nurse stopped by the room and gently placed her hand on Rachel's shoulder. "Ma'am," she said with a warm tone, "your son is very strong. And that dog, he's a four-legged angel." Rachel looked at Rex, her eyes red. "Not an angel," she whispered. "He's family." As night fell, hospital staff finished their shifts one by one. Inside the room, Rachel leaned against the bed frame, exhausted but at peace. She sang a lullaby, softly, almost just for Antony to hear. It was the song she used to sing every night, back when they still had enough food, enough candles, enough hope. Antony held his mother's finger, tighter, longer, and in that quiet night, a miracle came to life, not through medicine, not through machines, but through Rex's very existence. The one who had brought life back into that tiny body. The next morning, the little boy opened his eyes completely. Big, dark, and round, they gazed around curiously. When he spotted Rex at the door, the boy let out a soft giggle, faint, like wind brushing against leaves. Rex stepped forward, not leaping, just gently lowering his head beside Antony. "You remember Rex, don't you?" Rachel asked, her eyes brimming with love. Antony couldn't speak yet, but his hand reached out, touching the fur on the dog's neck. That gesture was the answer. The first dawn after many gloomy days stretched across the sky, casting a gentle light onto the hospital windows like a silent blessing from the heavens. In the small room where Antony lay, sunlight softly touched the boy's face, a face no longer pale and sickly. His big round eyes sparkled, his lips were pink, and his tiny hands stirred gently, reaching for his mother in a fragmented dream. Rachel woke up beside her son, her throat tightening when she saw Antony looking at her. He said nothing, but that smile, the first she had seen in so many painful days, mended every fracture in her soul. "We did it, my love," Rachel whispered, tears overflowing. "You came back." Just outside the door, Rex still lay silently, never having left his post for even a minute. When Antony woke up, the dog simply wagged his tail once, no jumping, no barking, but his eyes filled with quiet joy, made even the doctors and nurses pause to witness and silently admire. A few days later, the doctors confirmed that Antony had passed the critical stage. He would still need monitoring, but the most important thing was, he was alive. With the help of social workers, Rachel was enrolled in a special support program for single mothers. She was given a small apartment. It was clean, filled with light, not luxurious, but warmer than anywhere she had lived in recent months. On the morning of their discharge, Rachel dressed Antony in a cream-colored shirt, folded the blanket neatly, and carried her son out into the hallway. The little boy babbled, "Ma," not quite complete, but enough to bring tears to her eyes again. Rex walked beside them, his stride steady like an escort leading a tiny commander home from victory. The media had already caught wind of the story. As Rachel stepped through the hospital gate, a few reporters and neighbors were waiting. They didn't crowd or push. They simply clapped, softly, sincerely, as if they too had lived this journey. An elderly woman handed Anthony a small teddy bear. A man gave Rachel a bag of food. "We don't have much," he said, "but you're not alone." A new life began. The first days in the new apartment were filled with challenges. Rachel had to learn how to raise her child in a safe environment. Had to overcome the trauma of those darkest days. And had to learn to believe she was worthy of love. But with Rex by her side, everything seemed possible. Rex always lay at Anthony's feet as he slept. Always stood at the door whenever Rachel opened it. Always trotted around the house each morning, as if to make sure the world was still safe. Anthony grew little by little. His first time standing up. His early toddling steps. Rex was always there. The boy clung to Rex's ears. Used him for balance. And when he fell, he crawled back up. Always like that, never giving up. "Rex is my son's second pair of legs," Rachel often told the doctor. A month later, Rachel was offered a part-time job at the local library, her first job since Anthony was born. One day, as she walked past the reading corner, she heard a child's voice telling a story about the dog who brought a boy to the doctor. She turned back and saw Anthony sitting among a group of children. Innocently saying, "Rex brought me to the hospital. Mommy says Rex is a superhero." The kids burst out laughing. A boy asked, "Were you scared?" Anthony nodded. "Of course, but Rex wasn't, so I stopped being scared too." In the corner of the room, Rachel covered her mouth, trying not to let her tears fall. Rex, still lying under the table, looked up at her. No words were needed, no petting required, just a look, the look of a soul who understood the true meaning of family. That night, in the small apartment, Rachel wrote in her journal, "Maybe we've lost everything, but thanks to Rex, we found what's most precious, hope." Outside the window, moonlight bathed the silver hairs on Rex's head. He lay between Rachel and Anthony, breathing steadily, eyes half closed. A mother, a child, and a dog. They had nothing, but they had each other. The final night before winter arrived. On the final night before winter set in, Rachel stood by the window, holding Anthony asleep in her arms. Outside, the wind gently stirred the tree branches. But inside that small room, everything was at peace. Rex lay nearby, his head resting on his front paws. Eyes half closed but still facing mother and child, a habit that never changed. Rachel looked at him and smiled softly. "They say dogs don't understand words, but you understood the heart." There were no fireworks, no cheers, just a glance, a gentle wag of the tail. And that was enough to know the family had returned to where they truly belonged.